Allons-y.
Just one call away. Just one call away. You get
MOAN, focusing on civil liberties, foster youth, public radio, and the arts.
This is All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Mary Louise Kelly in Washington.
And I'm Scott Detrow on the edge of Vatican City, where there's a new pope, Pope Leo XIV. A couple of days before the world saw
Tournez à
white
droite.
smoke pour out of that chimney on the top of the Sistine Chapel, I had sat down and spoke with Father James Martin, a Jesuit priest. We talked about Martin's ministry to LGBTQ Catholics, and we talked about his participation in Pope Francis's recent synod on synodality, and we are going to talk more about Martin's experience at that synod now, because sitting at that table through the process with Martin, none other than the new pope, the first American pope, then Cardinal Robert Francis Prevost. Father Martin, welcome back to the show.
Préparez-vous à tourner à droite.
What was your response when you heard that name yesterday?
Stunned. I couldn't believe it. In fact, when they mentioned
Tournez à
Robert
droite.
Francis, I thought, now what Latin American cleric with those two first names is it that I don't know? But it was someone I knew. And he's
Vous êtes arrivé.
wonderful. It's a perfect choice.
What should we know about him? What was it like to sit with him at that big process?
Well, personally, I want to tell people how humble and modest and reserved he is. He's an actual humble person, which is a rarity in the Vatican. He's very smart. He's a man of few words. He's firm, right? When he speaks, he's confident about his opinions in a good way.
Prêt à
I
rouler.
think one of the most important things to know is that he was the prior general of the Augustinian order. Now that means he's the head of his whole religious order, which is elected, which means that all the Augustinians, known in the U.S. for Villanova, among other things, respect him, right? He has that background. He was in Latin America for many years in Peru. He speaks Spanish, he worked with the poor. He knows the Vatican. So he really comes with kind of the perfect CV for a pope.
Just like anybody else, you weren't sure which direction the church would go. Now Pope Leo is in charge of the Catholic Church. You said your first reaction was rejoicing. Why?
I know him, and so I know that the Cardinals have given the church a wonderful pope. I was also very moved by the choice of the name Leo, the 14th. Leo the 13th was the father of Catholic social teaching, and so this choice of name indicates his connection with the poor, with labor, with workers. It's just so beautiful. So I'll just say I cried, and I was really overwhelmed just how perfect a choice this is.
Is it strange mentally to have to think of somebody you know and work with as Pope Leo?
Well, I mean, one thing is, I don't know him that well. It's not like he's my best friend, but I think it's odd. I emailed him a few weeks ago about something, and it's strange to have the Pope's email.
Yeah. So you can change his contact on your phone if you have it. I do want to ask about a serious question. Over the past 24 hours, there's been a lot of digging into previous statements, previous actions that now Pope Leo, then Cardinal Prevost, has taken. One area that's getting a lot of attention is the area where you have focused your ministry. What should we know about his stance on the big questions before the church and the LGBTQ community?
Well, I think he's been pretty quiet since 2012. That was a different time, though.
C'est parti.
I would say a couple of things. I found him to be very open, very welcoming. I think his first speech on the balcony of St. Peter's talked about building bridges and synodality and listening to people. And I can only tell you that he treated me with great dignity and respect and friendliness and courtesy. And so I hope for good things from him. And I think it's, as Pope, he's in a different position than he was when he was Cardinal Prefect of the Academy of Bishops. It's a different role now. It calls him different skills and a different benefits.
You mentioned 2012. There's a quote going around of him criticizing, quote, homosexual lifestyle. Your thought is that's not something that's especially bothering you at this moment more than a decade later?
No, because I think he's an open person and I know him to be open. And also the grace of office, as we say in the Catholic Church, means that he's going to be a different kind of person as Pope. And we have to sort of pray for him and be with him in that way.
Lastly, does having an American
Tournez à
Pope
droite.
change anything for the Catholic Church or for American Catholics?
Absolutely. I mean, to have the Pope speak in an American accent is unbelievable. I mean, whenever we've heard the Pope, he's, even Francis who tried to speak in English, there's a kind of distance, there's a kind of remove. And I think one of the things that just elated me last night was what this means.
Préparez-vous à tourner à droite.
Imagine going back to Chicago or Villanova or anywhere and being able to
Tournez à
talk to people about
droite.
the Cubs and the White Sox, and it brings the papacy closer to people in a way that has never happened before.
The internet was pointing out we have a big East Pope now.
That's right, and I know from my cousins who went to Villanova that the bells at the Church of Villanova were ringing all night.
That is Father James Martin, author and editor-at-large at American Magazine. Thanks for talking to us about this moment.
A pleasure.
So far in his second term, President Trump has
Préparez-vous à
sounded
tourner à
mostly in
gauche.
sync with Russia when it comes to the war with Ukraine. But very recently, Trump
Tournez à
and his
gauche,
advisors
puis
have
tournez à droite.
criticized Russia and sounded more engaged with the government in Kyiv. So what is U.S. policy now when it comes to Ukraine? To break this down, we are joined by Here's Greg Myrie here in Washington. Hi, Greg.
Hi, Mary Louise.
And our correspondent in Kyiv, Joanna Kakissis. Hey there, Joanna.
Hey, Mary Louise.
Joanna, you start. I want to talk about the relationship between President Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. It has been contentious at points. They spoke by phone yesterday. What's the readout on that?
So according to Zelensky's office, it was a friendly phone call. It's the second positive conversation between these two recently. Of course, we remember that striking image of Trump and Zelensky sitting in an empty Vatican courtyard before Pope Francis's funeral. That was the first sign of a thaw in that frosty relationship. And based on what we can see and what we're hearing, they've moved on. Zelensky said in this latest conversation, he emphasized the need for a durable ceasefire that could be enforced, not like Russia's 3-day self-declared ceasefire, which started yesterday. Ukraine's military says Russia has already violated its own
Tournez à
ceasefire
droite.
hundreds of times.
Okay, so that's the view from Ukraine. Greg, what about the view from Washington? What's President Trump's readout on this call?
Yeah, Trump took to Truth Social and wrote, quote, if the ceasefire is not respected, the U.S. and its partners will impose further sanctions. So this is a clear message to Russia and its president, Vladimir Putin. Trump also repeated his desire for a 30-day ceasefire. Ukraine accepts this, Russia does not. So this clearly reflects the change in tone, but does it mean a change in U.S. policy? Andrew Weiss at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace is skeptical. He doesn't think Trump has changed his mind.
There's no indication at this point that Donald Trump, even if he's frustrated by Vladimir Putin's slow walking, intends to
Allez
put
tout
serious
droit.
pressure on Russia.
The reference there, of course, to Russian President Vladimir Putin. Joanna, jump back in here because I want to ask about another development. This is the minerals deal with Ukraine that the Trump administration has been pushing for a few months. There was pushback from Ukraine, but yesterday, Ukraine's parliament overwhelmingly approved this deal. What changed?
So the minerals agreement that's been ratified now is a much better deal for Ukraine. Zelensky rejected the first version because Ukraine would have given up its mineral wealth and gotten close to nothing in return. Now, members of parliament agreed that the latest deal gives Ukraine much more leverage, though several still have issues. I spoke with lawmaker Ivana Klibush-Kinzade, and here are her concerns.
It doesn't have any security guarantees, and then there is not even reference to the territorial integrity of Ukraine. And unfortunately, the government didn't want to come and give us the answers on the questions we have.
So now she and many others in parliament signed off after some wording changes.
Tenez la croix.
Use the U.S. as a strategic partner in this deal is a long.
Sortez à droite.
Greg Myrie, any prospect that that bond Joanna just mentioned that it may extend to additional military funding is running out?
Yeah, right now it's like a Trump consistently opposes more military assistance for Ukraine, and he hasn't pledged on that. The assistance that former President Biden supported and Congress approved last year is running out, as you noted, and will mostly or entirely end in the coming months. Europe is providing assistance, may step it up a bit, and Ukraine is making more of its own weapons, especially drones, which are proving very effective. And
Tenez la droite, puis sortez à droite.
Info and online filing at novotnycompany.com.
Sortez à droite.
Chance of showers at some point between now and midnight. After that, partly cloudy, 65. Another 20% chance of rain tomorrow afternoon. Sunny on the highs, 82 Fahrenheit, 28 Celsius. Which means that's almost considered Celsius.
Tenez la droite, puis sortez à droite.
Support for NPR comes from the station and from Fisher Investments. As a fiduciary, Fisher Investments is
Sortez à
often
droite.
to act in their client's best interest. Learn more at FisherInvestments.com. Investing in securities involves the risk of loss. From Easy Cater, a business tool for food, designed to help organizations order food for meetings and events from restaurants nationwide, set up employee lunch programs, and manage food spend at EasyCater.com. And from the listeners who support this NPR station.
Tenez la gauche, puis tournez à
This is
gauche.
All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Mary Louise Kelly.
And I'm Elsa Chang. Former U.S. Supreme Court Justice David Souter died at his home in New Hampshire yesterday. He was 85. In a statement today, Chief Justice John Roberts wrote this of Souter. He brought uncommon wisdom and kindness to a lifetime of public service. Here to help us remember Justice Souter's legacy is Herman Roosevelt III. He worked for Souter from 1999 to
Tournez à gauche.
2000 and is now a professor at the University of Pennsylvania Carey Law School. Thank you so much for being with us today, and I'm so sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
You know, relationships between law clerks and judges, justices in this case, those relationships can be so different, right, from chambers to chambers. What was it like to be in the Souter chambers?
Justice Souter was a wonderful judge. He was a great role model. And he was also a wonderful person. He was very kind, he was funny, and he treated everyone with kindness and respect.
He was also known for spending long hours in chambers, right? Like up to 12 hours a day? Were you expected to match his hours?
No, we didn't have to match his hours. So the amazing thing about Justice Souter was he would ask us to do some things, but not the kind of volume that clerks in other chambers often did.
Oh,
And then I sort of realized that most of what he was asking me to do was for my benefit.
Uh-huh.
It became clear to me that he really didn't need our help deciding, and what he was doing with that was really giving us the experience of discussing the case with the Supreme Court Justice, which of course was fabulous and exciting.
Yeah. Well, Justice was, of course, President George H.W. Bush. But he came to surprise, perhaps disappoint
Préparez-vous
many
à
conservatives,
tourner à
right,
droite.
by often joining the court's more liberal wing in later years on the bench. How do you think that fits in with Souter's
Tournez à droite.
legacy as a justice?
I do think that after the experience of believing they knew what they were getting and realizing Justice Souter was more independent than they had thought, Republicans decided that they weren't going to make that mistake again. So no more Souters was the rallying cry. And then you got a bunch of Republican appointees who in their confirmation hearings sounded very much like Souter. They would say all the
Tournez à
same things
gauche.
about restraint and the need to understand both sides, but they were more carefully vetted for their ideology, and they were more consistently conservative. So no more Souters, I think, has turned out to be true. I don't think we're seeing appointees where the president doesn't have a pretty good sense of how they're going to vote, but it's a bad thing. It's not a good thing.
When you watched Justice Souter engage
C'est
with
terminé.
other justices, how would you describe that dynamic? As a colleague, a communicator, a compromiser with the other justices?
Justice Souter got along well with all of the other justices. I think it was harder for the clerks sometimes.
How so?
We as clerks, we were only there for a year. And we're ambitious young lawyers, and we wanted things to go our way. But Justice Souter really didn't think about it that way. He had a much longer perspective. I do remember once we drafted a majority opinion, and there was this very vicious Scalia dissent, and I was just sort of horrified at the things that Justice Scalia was saying.
Uh-huh.
But Justice Souter said, "Oh, that's just Nino being Nino." He didn't take offense.
Is there a particular memory or moment outside of working on a case that stays with you?
Well, outside of working on a case, I guess I remember the afternoon that he took all his clerks to the National Portrait Gallery. We went through and he told us to pick out the one thing that we would want to steal.
Oh, I love that.
I I sort of like because of course he never would have stolen a painting from the National Portrait Gallery. But I think it showed his understanding that you need to figure out what you value in life and grab that.
Kermit Roosevelt III, former clerk to Supreme Court Justice David Souter, thank you so much for helping us remember your former boss.
Thank you for having me.
When President Trump heads to Saudi Arabia next week, so will some of the nation's top business leaders. Trump is looking for a repeat of his first foreign trip as president in 2017, when he also visited the kingdom and announced billions of dollars in Saudi investment in U.S. companies. NPR's senior White House correspondent Tamara Keith has more.
In Riyadh, President Trump was given an extravagant welcome. There was a traditional sword dance, a new counterterrorism center symbolically activated by a glowing orb, and the promise of arms sales.
Hundreds of billions of dollars of investments into the United States and jobs, jobs, jobs.
Then Secretary of State Rex Tillerson announced nearly $110 billion in arms sales, with potential other investments growing to as much as $350 billion.
These are going to result in literally hundreds of thousands of American jobs.
But the numbers were squishy. Some of the deals had been announced months before the trip. Others were at such preliminary stages there was no guarantee they would pan out. The Trump administration at the time did not publicly release a complete, detailed list of projects and planned weapon sales.
Was the deal even really what it said in the first place? And the answer to that is no.
Becca Wasser is at the Center for a New American Security, a think tank with strong ties to the Democratic Party. I called her asking for help trying to figure out how many of the arms sales actually went ahead.
Because in 2017, this was really just, a mirage of a larger deal. It's really unclear what actually occurred and when. Also, arms sales are notoriously hard to track.
The State Department says that since Trump's 2017 trip, the U.S. government has implemented $30 billion in foreign military sales cases with Saudi Arabia. Put another way, when Trump announced U.S. companies would sell $110 billion worth of arms to Saudi Arabia, that was only just the beginning. John Parachini is a senior defense researcher at the RAND Corporation.
There are a lot of steps in the arms sales process.
A process that involves complex negotiations, multiple federal agencies, Congress, arms manufacturers, and the customer countries. But that complexity wasn't part of how Trump sold it.
That's the style of this particular president. He's wanting to send a strong signal that he's supporting American business. But these things are really complicated and can take years.
As for the commercial deals, many weren't made public. Back in 2017, one Houston-based oil industry supplier announced that Saudi Arabia would purchase 50 onshore drilling rigs over a decade. But in a recent earnings call, said only 11 have been delivered so far. It's not unusual for business announcements to happen during presidential trips and for the White House to brag about them, says Don Graves, who was Deputy Secretary of Commerce in the Biden administration.
There's some packaging that goes on by every administration. You're trying to market yourself. You're trying to claim credit for deals.
But he says the partnerships the Trump administration hailed in 2017 were far from done deals. Now, as Trump prepares to return to the kingdom, Saudi Arabia has said it is aiming for $600 billion in new announcements. Trump, for his part, says he wants more.
I said, well, this time they've gotten richer. We've all gotten older. So I said, I'll go if you pay $1 trillion, $1 trillion to American companies.
Deals are expected in the defense, energy, AI, and healthcare sectors. Tamara Keith, NPR News.
It's 6:29, and you've been listening to All Things Considered on your NPR station, News 887. Marketplace is 1 minute away.
Houston Public Media is a service of the University of Houston and is supported with your gifts to the Houston Public Media Foundation. More information available online at houstonpublicmedia.org/donate. Support comes from Signify Business Cash by Wells Fargo. With this business credit card, cardholders can earn rewards on business purchases with no caps or categories to track. Learn more at wellsfargo.com/signify. Terms apply. Support comes from Arctic House, Houston's home for digital art and experiences for all ages, at the intersection of science and technology, located in the Heights, just off the MKT Trail. Tickets at artechhouse.com.
Hi, I'm Craig Cohen, reminding you to subscribe to the Houston Matters podcast to catch each day's show at your convenience. You can also find separate feeds of our regular conversations, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and the full menu. It's all available wherever you get your podcasts.
Marketplace is supported by Mercury. Mercury offers banking and financial software to help businesses do more in one place. Learn more at mercury.com.
One trade deal down, sort of. How many more to go? From American Public Media, this is Marketplace.
Marketplace is supported by Progressive Insurance. On the road and at home, customers can simplify their insurance needs and protect what's important by bundling home and auto with Progressive Insurance. Learn more about Progressive and bundling at progressive.com. And by Certified Financial Planner Professionals. CFP professionals are committed to acting in their client's best interest. Learn more about CFP professionals at letsmakeaplan.org.
In Baltimore, I'm Amy Scott, in for Kai Rizdal. It is Friday, the 9th of May. Good to have you with us. The first shipping containers full of Chinese goods subject to that new 145% tariff have begun arriving in U.S. ports, just as trade officials from the two countries are preparing to meet in Switzerland tomorrow. And after the Trump administration announced a framework for a deal with the U.K. yesterday. Joining me to talk about the state of trade negotiations and the rest of the economic week that was are Courtney Brown, economics reporter at Axios, and Sudeep Reddy, senior managing editor at